Welcome to the night gallows. Creepy forest. Haunted mansion. Creepy apparition. Scary stalker. Welcome to the night gallows. Scary stories.
Chapter 1. The Uninvited Guest. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance as Emily settled into her new home. The old Victorian house, with its creaking floors and eerie shadows, had always fascinated her. But now that she was alone in it, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Emily had just moved in after a painful divorce, seeking solace in the isolation of the countryside. The house was situated at the end of a long, winding road, surrounded by dense woods. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the silence was both comforting and unsettling. As she unpacked her belongings, Emily found an old photograph tucked behind a drawer in the master bedroom. It was a black and white picture of a family, their faces twisted into expressions of terror. On the back of the photo, a message was scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They're always watching." Shivering, Emily put the photograph away, telling herself it was just a silly prank left by the previous owners. That night, as Emily prepared dinner, she heard a faint tapping on the window. Startled, she looked up, but saw nothing. She blamed it on the wind and continued cooking. Later, as she was reading in the living room, the tapping returned, this time louder and more insistent. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the window, peering into the darkness. Again, she saw nothing. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, Emily double-checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. She even set up her old security system, just to be safe. As she climbed into bed, Emily tried to convince herself that she was just being paranoid. The house was old, and old houses made strange noises. That was all there was to it. But as she drifted off to sleep, Emily couldn't shake the image of the terrified faces in the photograph. And somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked, as if someone or something was moving. Outside, hidden in the shadows of the trees, a pair of eyes watched the house, unblinking. The intruder had arrived. Chapter 2. The Watcher. Emily awoke the next morning, feeling groggy and unsettled. The events of the previous night seemed like a distant dream, but the unease lingered. She made her way downstairs, her footsteps echoing in the empty house. As she brewed her morning coffee, Emily glanced out the kitchen window and froze. There in the distance, near the edge of the woods, she thought she saw a figure. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a person, standing still and watching the house. She rubbed her eyes, thinking she must be imagining things, but when she looked again, the figure was gone. Shaken, Emily decided to spend the day in town, away from the house. She explored the local shops and even struck up a conversation with the town librarian, an elderly woman named Agnes. When Emily mentioned the old Victorian house she had moved into, Agnes's eyes widened, and she leaned in closer. "That house has a history, dear," Agnes whispered, her voice trembling. "People say it's cursed. The last family that lived there, well, they didn't stay long. Strange things happened. They said they were being watched." Emily's heart skipped a beat, but she forced a laugh. "That's just superstition, right?" Agnes looked at her gravely. "I wouldn't be so sure. Be careful, child." Emily left the library, her mind racing. Was she really being watched? Or was it all in her head? That night, the tapping returned, louder and more urgent. Emily searched the house, her hands shaking, but found nothing amiss. She even ventured outside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, but saw no sign of anyone. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Emily could feel eyes on her, following her every move. She barely slept, tossing and turning, listening to the sounds of the house. In the morning, she found muddy footprints outside her back door, leading into the woods. The intruder was real, and he was getting closer. Terrified, Emily decided to take action. She would not be driven from her home. She would find out who was watching her and why. But as she began to dig into the history of the house and the mysterious events that had occurred there, Emily realized that she was uncovering something far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. The Watcher in the Woods was just the beginning. Chapter 3. Secrets Unearthed. Emily's investigation into the history of the house led her to a series of old newspaper articles. They told a chilling tale of a family that had lived in the house over a century ago. The family had been plagued by a series of unexplained events, culminating in a tragic fire that claimed several lives. The more Emily read, the more she became convinced that the events of the past were somehow connected to what was happening now. The feeling of being watched, the mysterious figure in the woods, the tapping on the windows, it all pointed to something dark and malevolent. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Emily reached out to a local historian, Dr. Samuel Harris, who agreed to meet her at the house. Dr. Harris was a tall, thin man with piercing blue eyes. He seemed to know more about the house than he was letting on, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. As they toured the house, Dr. Harris explained that the family who had lived there had been involved in occult practices. They had been attempting to contact the spirit world, and something had gone terribly wrong. The boundaries between our world and the next were breached, Dr. Harris said, his voice trembling. Something was unleashed. Something evil. Emily's blood ran cold. Was it possible that the intruder she had seen was not a living person at all, but a malevolent spirit? Dr. Harris showed her a hidden room in the basement, filled with strange symbols and artifacts. It was clear that this room had been used for rituals, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that she was standing in the very place where the tragedy had occurred. "The entity that was unleashed is still here," Dr. Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's bound to this house, and it won't rest until it gets what it wants." "What does it want?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Harris looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. "You, Emily. It wants you." The realization hit Emily like a ton of bricks. She was not just a random victim, she was being targeted. The entity wanted something from her, and it would stop at nothing to get it. As she and Dr. Harris worked together to uncover the secrets of the house and find a way to banish the entity, Emily knew that she was in a race against time. The intruder was getting bolder, and the attacks were escalating. The house was no longer a sanctuary, it was a trap, and Emily was the prey. But what did the entity want, and why her? The answers were buried in the past, and Emily knew that she had to unravel the mystery before it was too late. For the Watcher in the woods was closing in, and its hunger was growing. Chapter 4. The Ritual. Emily and Dr. Harris spent the following days poring over ancient texts and manuscripts, seeking a way to banish the entity that haunted the house. The more they learned, the more they realized the gravity of their situation. The entity was not just a malevolent spirit, it was a demon, summoned from the darkest depths of the underworld. It had been trapped in the house for over a century, growing in power and malice. Emily's connection to the demon was no accident. She discovered that she was a direct descendant of the family that had originally summoned it. The demon had been waiting for her, biding its time until she returned to the house. As the attacks grew more frequent and more violent, Emily knew that they were running out of time. The demon was growing stronger, feeding off her fear. Dr. Harris finally found a ritual that could banish the demon back to the underworld. It was a dangerous and complex procedure, requiring precise timing and specific ingredients. One wrong move could be fatal. They gathered the necessary materials and prepared the hidden room in the basement for the ritual. Emily could feel the demon's rage as they worked, its presence like a dark cloud hanging over the house. The night of the ritual arrived, and Emily's nerves were frayed. Dr. Harris was calm and focused, guiding her through the intricate steps of the ceremony. As they began to chant, the house seemed to come alive. The walls groaned, and the windows rattled as if in protest. The demon knew what they were doing, and it was furious. The ritual reached its climax, and Emily could feel the demon's presence bearing down on her, its anger a palpable force. She stumbled over a word in the chant, and Dr. Harris's eyes widened in horror. "No!" he screamed, but it was too late. There was a deafening roar, and the room was filled with a blinding light. Emily was thrown to the ground, her head spinning. When she looked up, Dr. Harris was gone. The ritual had failed. Emily was alone in the house with the demon, and it was angrier than ever. She stumbled to her feet, her mind racing. What had gone wrong? Where was Dr. Harris? And what would the demon do now? As she made her way upstairs, Emily knew that she had to leave. The house was no longer safe, and the demon would stop at nothing to claim her. But as she reached for the front door, It slammed shut with a deafening crash. The demon was not going to let her go. Chapter 5. The Final Confrontation. Emily was trapped. The demon had sealed the doors and windows, and the house had become a prison. She could feel its presence everywhere, taunting her, tormenting her. In desperation, Emily searched the house for any clue, any hint of what the demon wanted. She found Dr. Harris's notes and realized that there was one more ritual, a last-ditch effort to banish the demon. But it required a terrible sacrifice. Emily knew what she had to do. The demon had been summoned by her ancestors, and it was her responsibility to send it back. With grim determination, she gathered the necessary materials and returned to the hidden room in the basement. The demon's rage was a palpable force, but Emily's resolve was stronger. As she began the ritual, the house shook, and the air was filled with the demon's howls of fury. But Emily pressed on, her voice clear and strong as she chanted the ancient words. The room was filled with a blinding light, and Emily could feel the demon's power waning. It was working. But then she stumbled, her concentration breaking for just a moment. The demon seized the opportunity, lashing out with all its might. Emily screamed as pain shot through her body, but she refused to give in. With a final desperate effort, she completed the ritual, her voice rising to a triumphant crescendo. There was a deafening roar, and the house seemed to collapse in on itself. Emily was thrown to the ground, her vision fading. When she awoke, she was lying in the rubble of the hidden room. The house was silent, the oppressive presence of the demon gone. Emily had done it. She had banished the demon and broken the curse, but the victory had come at a cost. The house was in ruins, and Emily was alone, her body and soul scarred by the battle. As she made her way outside, Emily knew that she could never return to the house. It was a place of darkness and pain, a reminder of the terrible legacy of her family. But she also knew that she had faced her demons, both literal and metaphorical, and come out stronger. The watcher in the woods was gone, and Emily was free. As she walked down the winding road, leaving the house behind, Emily looked up at the sky. The storm had passed, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. A new day was dawning, and Emily was ready to face it.
If you enjoyed these stories, please give a like and subscribe for more haunting stories. And remember, you never know what might be standing behind you watching your every move.